Question 1. Consider a multinational manufacturing firm, Ethelred Dynamics, which operates facilities in multiple jurisdictions, including a new plant in a region with emerging regulations concerning the disposal of complex industrial solvents. Ethelred Dynamics has a well-established EMS based on ISO 14001 and is now updating its environmental aspects register and legal compliance obligations. Which of the following approaches most effectively ensures Ethelred Dynamics identifies and incorporates all relevant environmental legislation and other requirements, particularly concerning the novel solvent disposal regulations, in accordance with the principles outlined in ISO 14004/2016? Option A. Focusing only on legislation directly impacting the company's primary products and ignoring ancillary regulations related to waste streams or emissions not directly tied to core production. Option B. Delegating the responsibility for identifying new regulations to individual plant managers without a standardized reporting or verification process. Option C. Relying solely on the legal department's annual review of national environmental statutes and assuming local regulations are implicitly covered. Option D. Implementing a proactive, multi-jurisdictional research methodology that includes engaging with local environmental agencies, subscribing to regulatory update services for each operating region, and consulting industry-specific environmental compliance experts. Correct answer is C. Relying solely on the legal department's annual review of national environmental statutes and assuming local regulations are implicitly covered. Explanation. ISO 14004/2016 emphasizes the importance of identifying and understanding applicable environmental legislation and other requirements as a foundational step in establishing and maintaining an effective environmental management system. EMS. This process involves a systematic approach to ensure that an organization is aware of and complies with all relevant legal obligations. The guidelines suggest that an organization should consider its activities, products, and services, and then research the legislative framework at international, national, regional, and local levels that pertains to these aspects. This includes not only direct legal requirements, but also voluntary commitments, industry codes, and agreements that the organization subscribes to. The identification of these requirements should be documented and kept up to date, forming a crucial input for setting environmental objectives and targets, as well as for operational control and monitoring. The effectiveness of an EMS is significantly influenced by the thoroughness and accuracy of this initial legislative identification process. An organization must ensure that its understanding of applicable legislation is comprehensive, covering current laws and anticipating future changes. This proactive approach helps prevent non-compliance, reduces environmental risks, and fosters continuous improvement in environmental performance. Question 2. Consider a manufacturing facility producing specialized electronic components. The facility operates under strict emissions regulations, including limits on volatile organic compounds, VOC, and particulate matter. During the process of identifying and evaluating environmental aspects and impacts according to ISO 14004/2016, which of the following scenarios best exemplifies an indirect environmental aspect that requires consideration for potential influence, even if not directly controlled? Option A. The noise generated by the facility's machinery during its normal operating hours, affecting nearby residential areas. Option B. The direct release of VOCs from the facility's painting and coating operations into the atmosphere. Option C. The energy consumption of the facility's on-site wastewater treatment plant, leading to greenhouse gas emissions from the power source. Option D. The disposal of spent solvents by a third-party waste management company contracted by the facility, where the disposal method is not explicitly dictated by the facility. The correct answer is C. The energy consumption of the facility's on-site wastewater treatment plant, leading to greenhouse gas emissions from the power source. Explanation. ISO 14004/2016 provides guidance on establishing, implementing, maintaining, and improving an environmental management system, EMS. A core element of this is the identification and evaluation of environmental aspects and their associated impacts. Environmental aspects are elements of an organization's activities, products, or services that can interact with the environment. Environmental impacts are any changes to the environment, whether adverse or beneficial, wholly or partially resulting from an organization's environmental aspects. The standard emphasizes a systematic approach to this process, considering normal operating conditions, abnormal operations, and emergency situations. It also highlights the importance of considering both direct and indirect aspects. Direct aspects are those that an organization has direct control over, such as emissions from its own processes. Indirect aspects are those that the organization can influence but does not have direct control over, such as the environmental performance of its suppliers or the use of its products by customers. The evaluation of significance is crucial, often involving criteria related to scale, severity, duration, and reversibility of the impact. For instance, a significant aspect might be a large, long-term, and irreversible impact, even if it occurs infrequently. Conversely, a minor impact might be small in scale, short in duration, and easily reversible. The selection of significant environmental aspects informs the development of environmental objectives and targets, as well as operational controls. The guidelines also suggest engaging interested parties in the process of identifying and evaluating aspects and impacts to ensure a comprehensive understanding of potential environmental interactions. This systematic identification and evaluation are fundamental to achieving the intended outcomes of an EMS, such as pollution prevention and compliance with environmental legislation. Question 3. When establishing concrete actions to realize an environmental objective of reducing hazardous waste generation by 20% over 3 fiscal years, what foundational element, as outlined in ISO 14004/2016, is paramount for ensuring the actions are both effective and systematically managed? Option A. A complete cessation of all activities that generate hazardous waste, irrespective of operational feasibility or regulatory compliance. Option B. A detailed breakdown of required activities, clear assignment of responsibilities, defined timelines, and a comprehensive resource allocation plan. Option C. An immediate focus on purchasing new, advanced waste treatment technologies without prior process analysis. Option D. A broad statement of intent to engage employees in waste reduction, without specific measurable actions or accountability. The correct answer is B. A detailed breakdown of required activities, clear assignment of responsibilities, defined timelines, and a comprehensive resource allocation plan. Explanation. ISO 14004/2016 emphasizes that the development of actions to achieve environmental objectives and targets involves a systematic approach to planning and resource allocation. The core of this process is identifying the necessary activities, assigning responsibilities, establishing timelines, and determining the resources required. This includes considering potential environmental aspects and impacts, regulatory requirements, and the organization's overall strategic direction. For instance, if an organization has an objective to reduce water consumption by 15% within 2 years, the actions to achieve this target would involve a detailed analysis of water usage across all processes, identifying areas for improvement, e.g., leak detection, process optimization, employee awareness campaigns, assigning specific personnel to oversee these actions, setting interim milestones, and allocating budget for necessary equipment or training. The effectiveness of these actions is then monitored and reviewed to ensure progress toward the objective. This structured approach ensures that actions are not only feasible, but also contribute meaningfully to the environmental performance improvement goals, aligning with the Plan-Do-Check-Act cycle inherent in environmental management systems. Question 4. Consider an industrial facility operating under a complex set of environmental regulations, including air emission limits specified by a Regional Clean Air Act and wastewater discharge standards mandated by a national environmental protection agency. The organization has established a system for tracking legislative updates and conducts quarterly internal audits to assess compliance. During a recent audit, it was discovered that a specific process modification, implemented 6 months prior to address a production bottleneck, had inadvertently led to a slight but consistent increase in a particular air pollutant emission, pushing it closer to but still within the permitted limit. However, a newly published guidance document from the regulatory agency suggests that future interpretations of the emission standard might consider such process modifications as contributing to a less favorable compliance status, even if the absolute emission level remains below the stated threshold. Which of the following approaches best reflects the principles of proactive compliance evaluation as advocated by ISO 14004, 2016 in this scenario? Option A. Continue monitoring the emission levels quarterly, as they are currently within the legally defined limits, and wait for an explicit violation or a formal change in the regulation before taking further action. Option B. Immediately implement a control technology upgrade for the identified emission source to ensure a substantial buffer below the current regulatory limit and to preemptively address potential future interpretations of the standard. Option C. Document the finding internally and inform relevant operational staff about the proximity to the limit, but defer any significant corrective actions until a formal regulatory change or a definitive breach of the standard occurs. Option D. Initiate a review of the process modification's impact on all other environmental aspects, and simultaneously engage with the regulatory agency to seek clarification on the interpretation of the new guidance document before making any operational changes. The correct answer is B. Immediately implement a control technology upgrade for the identified emission source to ensure a substantial buffer below the current regulatory limit and to preemptively address potential future interpretations of the standard. Explanation: the periodic evaluation of compliance with legal and other requirements is a cornerstone of an effective environmental management system, EMS, as outlined in ISO 14004, 2016. This process involves systematically determining whether the organization's activities, products, and services are in conformance with applicable environmental laws, regulations, permits, and other commitments. ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes that the frequency and methodology of these evaluations should be determined by the organization based on factors such as the nature and significance of environmental aspects, changes in legislation, and previous compliance history. A robust evaluation process typically includes identifying all applicable legal requirements, establishing a system for tracking changes in these requirements, implementing procedures to ensure ongoing compliance, and conducting periodic assessments to verify adherence. These assessments might involve reviewing records, conducting site inspections, interviewing personnel, and comparing operational practices against regulatory mandates. The goal is to proactively identify and address any noncompliance, thereby preventing potential fines, legal actions, and reputational damage, and continually improving environmental performance. This proactive approach is crucial for maintaining the integrity of the EMS and demonstrating due diligence. Question 5. A manufacturing facility producing specialized coatings is evaluating its operational activities to identify those with significant environmental aspects, as guided by ISO 14004, 2016. Their process involves several steps, including raw material handling, mixing, application, curing, and waste management. The facility operates under local regulations concerning volatile organic compound, VOC, emissions, and hazardous waste disposal. Recent community feedback has also highlighted concerns about air quality in the vicinity. Which of the following approaches best reflects the determination of significance for an operational activity, considering both internal performance and external influences? Option A. Primarily assessing significance based on the cost of implementing environmental controls for each activity, with less emphasis on the actual environmental performance or regulatory mandates. Option B. Evaluating activities by cross-referencing the potential for adverse environmental impacts, e.g., air pollution, water contamination, waste generation, with the severity of regulatory requirements and the level of public concern, to establish a hierarchy of significance. Option C. Focusing solely on activities that have resulted in past non-compliance with environmental permits, ignoring potential impacts from current operations. Option D. Prioritizing activities based on the volume of raw materials consumed, irrespective of the potential environmental harm or regulatory status of those materials. The correct answer is D. Prioritizing activities based on the volume of raw materials consumed, irrespective of the potential environmental harm or regulatory status of those materials. Explanation: the process of identifying operational activities with significant environmental aspects under ISO 14004, 2016 involves a systematic approach that considers various criteria. These criteria are used to evaluate the potential environmental impact of an activity. ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes that significance is determined by the organization itself, based on its context and objectives. Key factors include the magnitude of the aspect, its potential to cause harm, regulatory requirements, and stakeholder concerns. For example, a company manufacturing electronic components might identify energy consumption during the soldering process as an operational activity. The environmental aspect is energy use. Determine significance. They would assess the quantity of energy consumed, magnitude, potential for greenhouse gas emissions, harm, compliance with energy efficiency regulations, regulatory context, and any public perception regarding carbon footprint stakeholder concerns. If the energy consumption is substantial, contributes significantly to the company's overall emissions, and is subject to stringent energy efficiency targets, it would likely be deemed significant. This determination is crucial for prioritizing environmental objectives and implementing appropriate controls. The guidelines suggest considering both normal operating conditions, as well as abnormal or emergency situations, and the potential for accidents or incidents. The selection of criteria should be documented and consistently applied throughout the organization. Question 6. A manufacturing firm, operating under stringent local emissions regulations that mandate public disclosure of certain air quality data, is refining its external communication strategy for environmental performance. The firm has identified several key interested parties, including local residents, environmental advocacy groups, and regulatory bodies. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 14004, 2016 regarding external communication, which approach would most effectively balance the need for transparency, regulatory compliance, and efficient dissemination of environmental information to these diverse groups. Option A. Organizing infrequent public forums with limited pre-distributed information, primarily to present the company's perspective on environmental matters without facilitating open dialogue or detailed data sharing. Option B. Relying solely on legally mandated reporting to regulatory agencies, assuming this fulfills all external communication obligations and interested party expectations. Option C. Distributing generic newsletters to all interested parties once a year, containing broad environmental statements without specific data or interactive features. Option D. Establishing a dedicated, regularly updated section on the company website with detailed reports, summaries, and a direct contact channel for inquiries, supplemented by press releases for significant events and direct engagement with regulatory bodies as required by law. The correct answer is D. Establishing a dedicated, regularly updated section on the company website with detailed reports, summaries, and a direct contact channel for inquiries, supplemented by press releases for significant events and direct engagement with regulatory bodies as required by law. Explanation. ISO 14004, 2016 provides guidance on implementing an environmental management system, EMS. When considering external communication processes, the standard emphasizes the importance of selecting appropriate methods and channels to convey relevant environmental information to interested parties. This includes understanding the needs and expectations of these parties and tailoring the communication accordingly. The effectiveness of external communication is linked to its clarity, accuracy, and timeliness. The standard suggests that organizations should consider the nature of the information, the intended audience, and the regulatory context when designing their communication strategy. For instance, communicating about a significant environmental incident might require a different approach than communicating about the organization's annual environmental performance. The choice of communication method should facilitate understanding and engagement with the audience, ensuring that the intended message is received and comprehended. This process is iterative and should be reviewed to ensure it remains effective in meeting the organization's environmental objectives and addressing stakeholder concerns, while also complying with any relevant environmental disclosure regulations. Question 7. A global electronics manufacturer, Volt Tech Industries, is in the process of establishing a comprehensive environmental management system, EMS, across its diverse operational sites, including facilities in Germany, which adhere to the stringent Federal Emission Control Act, Bundesemissionsschutzgesetz, and in Brazil, where environmental licensing is governed by Law No. 6. 938/81. Considering the guidelines provided in ISO 14004, 2016 regarding the assignment of responsibilities and the establishment of timelines for environmental objectives, what is the most critical consideration for Volt Tech when defining roles and setting deadlines for achieving a significant reduction in water consumption across these varied regulatory environments? Option A. Focusing solely on the financial implications of water usage, assigning responsibility to the procurement department to negotiate better water utility rates across all locations. Option B. Ensuring that assigned responsibilities are clearly linked to specific job functions and that timelines are phased to accommodate differing local regulatory compliance dates and the availability of water-saving technologies at each site. Option C. Delegating the primary responsibility for water reduction to the highest-ranking environmental officer at each regional headquarters to ensure executive oversight. Option D. Establishing a uniform, aggressive timeline for all global facilities to demonstrate a consistent commitment to environmental stewardship, regardless of local conditions. The correct answer is B. Ensuring that assigned responsibilities are clearly linked to specific job functions and that timelines are phased to accommodate differing local regulatory compliance dates and the availability of water-saving technologies at each site. Explanation: ISO 14004, 2016, in its guidance on implementing an environmental management system, EMS, emphasizes the importance of clearly assigning responsibilities and establishing realistic timelines for environmental objectives and actions. When considering the development of an EMS for a multinational manufacturing firm that operates in various jurisdictions with differing environmental regulations, such as stricter emission standards in the European Union compared to emerging markets in Southeast Asia, the assignment of responsibilities and the establishment of timelines must be adaptable and context-specific. The guidelines suggest that responsibilities should be assigned based on the nature of the activity and its potential environmental impact, ensuring that individuals or teams have the authority and resources to fulfill their roles. Timelines for achieving environmental objectives and implementing corrective actions should be realistic, taking into account factors like technological feasibility, resource availability, regulatory compliance deadlines, and the overall strategic priorities of the organization. For instance, a timeline for reducing hazardous waste generation might be influenced by the availability of alternative disposal methods or the lead time for acquiring new processing equipment, while also needing to align with any mandated reduction targets set by local environmental authorities. The process involves defining roles, delegating authority, setting performance indicators, and establishing review mechanisms to ensure progress and adapt as necessary, especially when dealing with diverse regulatory landscapes and operational complexities. The overarching principle is to integrate environmental management into the organization's overall governance and operational framework, ensuring accountability and driving continuous improvement. Question 8. A chemical processing plant, identified as having significant environmental aspects related to water discharge and air emissions, is developing its environmental objectives in accordance with ISO 14004-2016. The company's environmental policy commits to pollution prevention and compliance with all applicable environmental laws, including the Clean Water Act and the Clean Air Act. During their review, they also noted opportunities to engage with local environmental advocacy groups who have expressed concerns about the plant's historical water quality impact on a nearby river. Which of the following environmental objectives would best align with the principles of ISO 14004-2016 for this organization? Option A. Reduce the total volume of wastewater discharged by 15% within 2 years, ensuring compliance with all permit limits and initiating a pilot program for water recycling in collaboration with a local university to address community concerns. Option B. Achieve zero environmental incidents annually, irrespective of the severity or cause, to demonstrate proactive environmental stewardship. Option C. Invest in new technologies that promise a 50% reduction in energy consumption over 5 years, assuming that energy use is indirectly linked to water discharge and air emissions. Option D. Enhance employee environmental awareness through mandatory training sessions, focusing on general principles of waste reduction and resource conservation, without specific measurable targets. The correct answer is A. Reduce the total volume of wastewater discharged by 15% within 2 years, ensuring compliance with all permit limits, and initiating a pilot program for water recycling in collaboration with a local university to address community concerns. Explanation: ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes that environmental objectives should be consistent with the organization's environmental policy and consider significant environmental aspects, legal and other requirements, and opportunities for improvement. When setting objectives, the organization must also consider the views of interested parties. For a manufacturing firm aiming to reduce its environmental footprint, a robust objective would directly address a significant environmental aspect, be measurable, and align with the overall policy. For instance, if energy consumption is identified as a significant aspect, an objective related to reducing energy intensity per unit of production is appropriate. This objective must be time-bound and include targets for achievement. The guidelines also stress the importance of integrating objectives into business processes and ensuring they are communicated and understood throughout the organization. The process involves establishing, implementing, and maintaining objectives at relevant functions and levels. Considering the context of a company dealing with waste management, setting an objective to decrease the volume of non-hazardous waste sent to landfill by a specific percentage over a defined period, while also considering regulatory requirements for waste diversion and engaging with local community groups regarding waste reduction initiatives, exemplifies a comprehensive approach aligned with ISO 14004, 2016 principles. This objective is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, smart, and it incorporates stakeholder input and legal considerations. Question 9. When a multinational manufacturing firm, operating in jurisdictions with varying environmental regulations like the EU's Industrial Emissions Directive and the U.S. Clean Air Act, seeks to implement a Unified Environmental Management System, EMS, based on ISO 14004, 2016, which fundamental principle of the standard should guide the development of its overarching environmental policy to ensure both compliance and strategic alignment across all operations. Option A. The environmental policy must explicitly commit to the continual improvement of the EMS and the prevention of pollution, while also being relevant to the organization's strategic context and compliance obligations, serving as the foundation for integrating environmental considerations into all business processes. Option B. The environmental policy should be solely dictated by the strictest environmental legislation encountered across all operating regions to ensure a universally high standard, regardless of local requirements. Option C. The environmental policy should prioritize public relations and corporate social responsibility reporting, ensuring that external communication reflects a strong environmental commitment. Option D. The environmental policy should primarily focus on achieving cost efficiencies through waste reduction and resource conservation, as these are the most tangible benefits of an EMS for stakeholders. The correct answer is A. The environmental policy must explicitly commit to the continual improvement of the EMS and the prevention of pollution, while also being relevant to the organization's strategic context and compliance obligations, serving as the foundation for integrating environmental considerations into all business processes. Explanation: ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes the establishment of an environmental policy that is appropriate to the organization's context, including its significant environmental aspects and impacts, and its compliance obligations. A key principle is that the policy should be a commitment to continual improvement of the environmental management system and to preventing pollution. When considering the integration of an EMS with other management systems, such as quality or occupational health and safety, the overarching aim is to achieve synergy and efficiency. This integration requires careful consideration of common elements like leadership commitment, planning, operational control, performance evaluation, and management review. The guidelines within ISO 14004, 2016 suggest that a well-integrated system leverages these commonalities to streamline processes, reduce duplication, and foster a more holistic approach to organizational management. For instance, when a company is addressing a new environmental regulation, such as the European Union's REACH registration, evaluation, authorization, and restriction of chemicals directive, The EMS framework helps identify the relevant environmental aspects, e.g., chemical use, waste generation, establish controls, and monitor compliance. The policy serves as the guiding document for these actions, ensuring that the organization's environmental objectives are aligned with its strategic direction and legal requirements. The effectiveness of the policy is often measured by its ability to drive tangible environmental improvements and demonstrate a proactive stance towards environmental stewardship, which is a core tenet of ISO 14004, 2016. Question 10. A chemical processing plant operating under an ISO 14001 certified environmental management system has identified significant airborne particulate matter emissions originating from its bulk material handling and packaging operations. The plant is seeking to implement a control measure that aligns with the general guidelines for minimizing environmental impacts as detailed in ISO 14004, 2016. Considering the hierarchy of controls and the principles of pollution prevention, which of the following strategies would represent the most fundamental and effective approach to reducing these particulate emissions at their source? Option A. Installing a baghouse filtration system on the exhaust vents of the packaging machinery to capture airborne particulates. Option B. Developing and enforcing strict operating procedures for material loading and unloading to minimize disturbance. Option C. Substituting the current dry powder feedstock with a granulated or pelletized form to reduce dust generation during handling. Option D. Implementing a rigorous dust suppression schedule using water sprays at transfer points and conveyor belts. The correct answer is C. Substituting the current dry powder feedstock with a granulated or pelletized form to reduce dust generation during handling. Explanation. The core principle of ISO 14004, 2016 is to provide guidance on implementing an environmental management system, EMS, to achieve its intended outcomes. When considering controls to minimize environmental impacts, the standard emphasizes a hierarchical approach, prioritizing elimination and substitution before resorting to engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, personal protective equipment. This hierarchy aligns with best practices in risk management and pollution prevention. For a manufacturing facility that has identified volatile organic compound (VOC) emissions from a solvent-based coating process as a significant environmental aspect, the most effective control, according to the principles of ISO 14004, 2016, would be to eliminate or substitute the hazardous solvent. This addresses the source of the impact directly. Engineering controls, such as installing a thermal oxidizer, would be the next best option, as they treat the emissions before release. Administrative controls, like limiting operating hours or implementing stricter work procedures, are less effective as they don't inherently reduce the emission source. Personal protective equipment, while crucial for worker safety, does not minimize the environmental impact itself. Therefore, the most proactive and impactful control strategy aligns with the elimination or substitution of the problematic solvent. Question 11. A manufacturing facility operating under an ISO 14001 certified environmental management system, which also follows the general guidelines of ISO 14004-2016, discovers that a significant quantity of untreated wastewater was discharged due to a faulty valve in their effluent treatment plant. While the immediate response involved repairing the valve and containing the spill, the facility's environmental manager is tasked with determining the most appropriate follow-up action according to the principles outlined in ISO 14004, 2016, for addressing this nonconformity and preventing similar occurrences. Which of the following actions best reflects the systematic approach to nonconformity and corrective/preventive action as described in the guidelines? Option A. Issuing a formal warning to the operator responsible for the effluent treatment plant and ensuring immediate repair of the faulty valve. Option B. Documenting the nonconformity in the environmental incident log and conducting a review of the incident during the next scheduled internal audit. Option C. Conducting a thorough root cause analysis of the valve failure, implementing a preventive maintenance schedule for all critical effluent treatment plant components, and updating operational procedures to include a daily valve integrity check. Option D. Investigating potential future environmental risks by reviewing industry best practices for wastewater discharge and considering a complete overhaul of the effluent treatment plant. Correct answer is C. Conducting a thorough root cause analysis of the valve failure, implementing a preventive maintenance schedule for all critical effluent treatment plant components, and updating operational procedures to include a daily valve integrity check. Explanation: ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes a systematic approach to managing environmental aspects and impacts. When a nonconformity is identified within an environmental management system, EMS, the guidelines stress the importance of understanding the root cause to prevent recurrence. This involves not just addressing the immediate issue, but also implementing actions that eliminate the underlying reasons for the nonconformity. Corrective actions are reactive, aiming to fix the identified problem and its consequences. Preventive actions, on the other hand, are proactive, seeking to identify potential nonconformities before they occur and implementing measures to avert them. ISO 14004, 2016 advocates for a robust process of investigation, root cause analysis, and the implementation of effective corrective and preventive actions. The effectiveness of these actions is then evaluated through monitoring and review. The distinction lies in the timing and scope of the intervention. Corrective actions deal with existing problems, while preventive actions anticipate and mitigate future ones. The guidelines promote learning from nonconformities to continually improve the EMS. Question 12. A chemical processing plant, adhering to ISO 14004, 2016 guidelines for its environmental management system, is undertaking a comprehensive review of its water usage and wastewater discharge. The plant operates under strict local regulations that mandate a reduction in total dissolved solids, TDS, in its effluent by 15% within the next fiscal year. The current average TDS concentration in the wastewater is 500 mg/L, and the daily discharge volume is 1,000,000 liters. The plant's internal analysis indicates that 60% of the wastewater volume originates from cooling tower blowdown, 30% from equipment cleaning, and 10% from general process water. Which of the following strategic resource management approaches, focused on water, would most effectively support achieving the regulatory TDS reduction target while aligning with the principles of ISO 14004, 2016? Option A. Focusing solely on optimizing the process water flow rates to reduce consumption, as this stream typically has the lowest TDS concentration, without addressing the larger volume streams. Option B. Introducing a new chemical additive into the process that is known to bind with dissolved solids, precipitating them out of solution before they enter the wastewater stream, even if this additive itself poses a minor environmental risk. Option C. Increasing the frequency of equipment cleaning using higher volumes of fresh water to ensure thorough sanitation, which would dilute the overall TDS concentration in the final effluent. Option D. Implementing a closed-loop cooling system that recycles a significant portion of the blowdown water after treatment, thereby reducing the overall volume of wastewater requiring discharge and concentrating the TDS in a smaller, more manageable stream for specialized treatment. The correct answer is D. Implementing a closed-loop cooling system that recycles a significant portion of the blowdown water after treatment, thereby reducing the overall volume of wastewater requiring discharge and concentrating the TDS in a smaller, more manageable stream for specialized treatment. Explanation: the core of resource management within an environmental management system, EMS, as elaborated in ISO 14004, 2016, revolves around optimizing the use of inputs and minimizing waste outputs. This involves a life cycle perspective, considering raw materials, energy, water, and other consumables from procurement through to disposal or reuse. A key aspect is identifying opportunities for reduction, substitution with less impactful alternatives, and fostering circular economy principles. For instance, a manufacturing facility aiming to improve its resource efficiency might conduct a detailed material flow analysis to pinpoint where significant quantities of a particular metal are lost during the production process. This analysis could reveal that a substantial portion of the metal is wasted in the form of scrap generated by a specific machining operation. To address this, the facility could implement process modifications, such as optimizing cutting parameters or investing in more precise tooling, to reduce scrap generation. Alternatively, a program could be established to collect and reprocess the existing scrap for internal reuse or sale to specialized recyclers. The ultimate goal is to decouple economic activity from resource consumption and environmental degradation, aligning with the broader principles of sustainable development and contributing to regulatory compliance, such as waste reduction targets set by environmental agencies. Question 13. When developing an internal audit program for an environmental management system, EMS, in accordance with ISO 14004-2016, what fundamental inputs should guide the determination of audit scope, frequency, and methodology to ensure the program effectively assesses the EMS's performance and compliance? Option A. The availability of internal audit personnel, the cost of conducting audits, and the perceived importance of specific operational departments by senior management. Option B. The total number of employees in the organization, the duration of the EMS's operational history, and the general public's perception of the company's environmental impact. Option C. The significance of identified environmental aspects, outcomes from prior internal and external audits, and the organization's progress towards its environmental objectives. Option D. The number of environmental regulations applicable to the industry sector, the organization's marketing strategy regarding environmental performance, and the geographical location of its facilities. The correct answer is C. The significance of identified environmental aspects, outcomes from prior internal and external audits, and the organization's progress towards its environmental objectives. Explanation. ISO 14004-2016 emphasizes that the planning of internal audits should be based on the significance of environmental aspects, the results of previous audits, and the environmental performance of the organization. When planning an internal audit program, an organization must consider the environmental aspects that have significant impacts, as identified in its environmental review and documented in its EMS. Furthermore, the effectiveness of controls for these significant aspects should be a key driver for audit scheduling and focus. The results of prior audits, including nonconformities and opportunities for improvement, are crucial for determining the frequency and scope of subsequent audits to ensure that corrective actions are effective and that the EMS is continuously improved. Regulatory requirements and legal obligations relevant to the organization's environmental aspects also inform the audit plan, ensuring compliance is regularly verified. Therefore, a comprehensive audit plan integrates these elements to provide assurance that the EMS is functioning as intended and achieving its environmental objectives. Question 14. Considering the foundational role of an environmental policy and objectives within an environmental management system as outlined in ISO 14004-2016, which statement most accurately reflects their relationship and the process of their establishment? Option A. The environmental policy is a dynamic document that is revised annually based on the achievement of the previous year's objectives, and objectives are set without direct reference to significant environmental aspects. Option B. The environmental policy provides a broad declaration of commitment from which specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound SMART environmental objectives are derived, taking into account significant environmental aspects and legal obligations. Option C. Legal and other requirements are the sole drivers for both the environmental policy and objectives, with no consideration given to the organization's internal context or voluntary commitments. Option D. Environmental objectives are primarily determined by market demand and competitive pressures, with the environmental policy serving as a secondary communication tool to reflect these market-driven goals. The correct answer is B. The environmental policy provides a broad declaration of commitment from which specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound SMART environmental objectives are derived, taking into account significant environmental aspects and legal obligations. Explanation. ISO 14004-2016 emphasizes that the environmental policy and objectives are foundational elements of an effective environmental management system, EMS. The policy, a statement of intent and principles, guides the organization's actions regarding its environmental performance. Objectives, derived from this policy and considering significant environmental aspects, provide measurable targets for improvement. When establishing objectives, organizations must consider legal and other requirements, as well as opportunities for improvement. The policy serves as the overarching commitment, and objectives translate this commitment into actionable, quantifiable steps. The effectiveness of the EMS is directly linked to how well the objectives are aligned with the policy and how rigorously they are pursued. For instance, if an organization's policy commits to reducing waste, an objective might be to decrease hazardous waste generation by a specific percentage within a defined time frame. This objective must be measurable, achievable, relevant, time-bound, and aligned with the policy's intent. The guidelines highlight that the policy should be appropriate to the organization's context and communicated throughout the organization. Objectives, in turn, should be reviewed and updated as necessary, particularly when there are changes in the organization's activities, products, services, or in the regulatory landscape, such as new emission standards or waste disposal regulations that impact the organization's operations. The interconnectedness ensures that the EMS drives continuous improvement in environmental performance. Question 15. An organization is reviewing its internal communication processes for its environmental management system, EMS, as per ISO 14004-2016. The aim is to enhance the integration of environmental considerations across all departments and to ensure that operational staff have a clear understanding of their roles in achieving environmental objectives. Which of the following communication strategies would best facilitate this goal by promoting a two-way flow of information and encouraging active participation from all organizational levels regarding environmental performance? Option A. Establishing a top-down cascade of environmental information, where senior management communicates directives to middle management, who then relay them to their respective teams, without formal channels for upward communication or feedback on implementation challenges. Option B. Implementing a structured feedback mechanism through regular departmental environmental performance reviews, supplemented by a dedicated online portal for employees to submit suggestions and raise concerns, with documented responses and actions taken. Option C. Disseminating environmental policy updates solely through company-wide email announcements and posting the latest environmental objectives on the corporate intranet without any provision for direct employee input or dialogue. Option D. Relying exclusively on annual all-hands meetings to communicate environmental performance data and future targets, with a question-and-answer session limited to the final 10 minutes. The correct answer is B. Implementing a structured feedback mechanism through regular departmental environmental performance reviews, supplemented by a dedicated online portal for employees to submit suggestions and raise concerns, with documented responses and actions taken. Explanation: ISO 14004-2016 emphasizes the importance of effective internal communication for the successful implementation and continual improvement of an environmental management system, EMS. The standard highlights that communication should be a two-way process, allowing for feedback and input from all levels of the organization. This ensures that environmental policies, objectives, and operational controls are understood, and that employees can contribute to achieving environmental performance targets. The guidelines suggest that communication channels should be tailored to the needs of different stakeholders within the organization, considering their roles and responsibilities related to environmental aspects. Establishing mechanisms for receiving and responding to feedback is crucial for identifying potential issues, fostering a proactive environmental culture, and driving innovation in environmental practices. This aligns with the overall goal of integrating environmental considerations into an organization's strategic and operational decision-making processes. Effective internal communication also supports compliance with relevant environmental legislation and regulations by ensuring that employees are aware of their obligations and the potential consequences of non-compliance. Question 16. A manufacturing facility producing specialized ceramic components has identified several environmental aspects, including water usage for cooling machinery, dust emissions from grinding processes, and waste packaging from raw material delivery. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 14004-2016 for determining the significance of environmental aspects, which of the following combinations of criteria would most effectively guide the organization in prioritizing these aspects for management and control? Option A. Water usage based on total volume consumed and potential for local aquifer depletion, dust emissions considering regulatory emission limits, and potential for respiratory health impacts on nearby communities, and waste packaging based on the volume of non-recyclable material and associated landfill costs. Option B. Water usage based on the proximity of the facility to water bodies, dust emissions based on the color of the emitted particles, and waste packaging based on the weight of the incoming raw materials. Option C. Water usage based on the historical data of its availability in the region, dust emissions based on the visual opacity of the emissions, and waste packaging based on the variety of materials used in its composition. Option D. Water usage based on the number of personnel involved in its management, dust emissions based on the perceived nuisance factor by employees, and waste packaging based on the aesthetic appearance of the packaging material. The correct answer is A. Water usage based on total volume consumed and potential for local aquifer depletion, dust emissions considering regulatory emission limits, and potential for respiratory health impacts on nearby communities, and waste packaging based on the volume of non-recyclable material and associated landfill costs. Explanation: the significance of an environmental aspect is determined by evaluating its potential or actual environmental impact. ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes a structured approach to this evaluation. Key criteria for determining significance often include the scale of the impact, e.g., local, regional, global, the severity of the impact, e.g., irreversible damage, temporary disturbance, the frequency of the activity, the regulatory compliance status, and stakeholder concerns. For instance, a minor spill of a non-hazardous substance that is quickly contained and has no regulatory implications would likely be considered less significant than a continuous emission of a regulated pollutant that exceeds permitted limits, even if the latter is smaller in volume. The process involves understanding the context of the organization, its operations, products, and services, and how these interact with the environment. This understanding is then used to apply a set of criteria, which may be qualitative, quantitative, or a combination of both, to rank aspects. The guidelines suggest that an aspect's significance should be regularly reviewed and updated as conditions change, such as new regulations or changes in operational processes. It is not solely about the quantity of a substance released, but also about the potential for harm, legal consequences, and societal perception. Question 17. When a manufacturing firm, following ISO 14004, 2016 guidelines, finds that its established waste reduction targets for hazardous materials are consistently not being met despite diligent implementation of operational controls, which subsequent action within the Plan Do Check Act cycle would most effectively address this performance gap? Option A. Conduct an external audit of the entire environmental management system by an accredited third party. Option B. Initiate a comprehensive public relations campaign to highlight the company's environmental efforts. Option C. Review the effectiveness of existing operational controls and adjust them to improve waste reduction. Option D. Revise the environmental policy to include more ambitious waste reduction objectives. Correct answer is C. Review the effectiveness of existing operational controls and adjust them to improve waste reduction. Explanation: the Plan Do Check Act (PDCA) cycle is a fundamental iterative management method used for the control and continuous improvement of processes and products. In the context of ISO 14004, 2016, which provides general guidelines on implementing environmental management systems, EMS, understanding how each phase of PDCA applies is crucial for effective environmental performance. The plan phase involves establishing objectives and processes necessary to deliver results in accordance with the organization's environmental policy. This includes identifying environmental aspects, determining legal and other requirements, and setting environmental objectives and targets. The Do phase involves implementing the processes for managing environmental aspects. This includes providing resources, ensuring competence, awareness and training, communication, documentation, operational control, and emergency preparedness and response. The Check phase focuses on monitoring and measuring performance against established criteria. This involves evaluating compliance with legal and other requirements, conducting internal audits, and analyzing performance data. The Act phase involves taking actions to continually improve the EMS. This includes addressing nonconformities, implementing corrective actions, and reviewing the EMS to ensure its continuing suitability, adequacy, and effectiveness. Therefore, When an organization identifies that its waste reduction targets are not being met, the most appropriate action within the PDCA framework, specifically within the ACT phase, is to review the effectiveness of the implemented operational controls and adjust them as necessary to achieve the desired outcomes. This review might involve re-evaluating the waste segregation procedures, the training provided to staff on waste management, or the selection of waste disposal contractors. The goal is to identify the root causes of the underperformance and implement improvements. Question 18. When establishing an environmental management system in accordance with ISO 14004-2016, an organization operating a chemical synthesis plant near a protected wetland must systematically identify potential emergency situations. Which of the following factors, when considered in isolation, would be the least effective in identifying a broad spectrum of potential environmental emergencies? Option A. Consulting with local emergency services and community representatives regarding potential off-site impacts. Option B. Reviewing only the material safety data sheets, MSDS, for all chemicals stored on-site. Option C. Analyzing historical internal incident reports and conducting regular site inspections for process deviations. Option D. Evaluating the potential impact of extreme weather patterns, such as flooding and high winds, on containment structures. The correct answer is B. Reviewing only the material safety data sheets, MSDS, for all chemicals stored on-site. Explanation. ISO 14004-2016 emphasizes the proactive identification of potential emergency situations and environmental incidents. This involves considering a range of factors that could lead to unplanned releases of substances or other adverse environmental impacts. Key considerations include the nature of the organization's operations, the types of materials handled, e.g., hazardous substances, large volumes of water, the proximity of sensitive environmental receptors, e.g., waterways, residential areas, and the reliability of existing control measures. Furthermore, an organization must also factor in external influences such as extreme weather events, equipment failure, human error, and potential acts of sabotage or vandalism, all of which could trigger an emergency. The process should also learn from past incidents, both internal and external to the organization, and from industry best practices. Analyzing historical data, conducting site walkthroughs, and engaging with employees at all levels are crucial for a comprehensive identification of these potential scenarios. The goal is to anticipate what could go wrong and to develop appropriate preparedness and response measures to mitigate the consequences. Question 19. A chemical processing plant in a region with evolving environmental legislation is reviewing its compliance obligations concerning air emissions. They have identified that a new regulation, the Atmospheric Purity Act, has been enacted, setting stricter limits on volatile organic compound (VOC) emissions from their specific type of reactor. Simultaneously, plant has an existing voluntary commitment to a chemical industry stewardship program that encourages a 10% reduction in VOC emissions beyond legal requirements. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 14004-2016 regarding the management of compliance obligations, what is the most comprehensive approach for the plant to integrate these evolving requirements into its environmental management system? Option A. Prioritize the new Atmospheric Purity Act by adjusting operational controls to meet its VOC limits and defer updating the EMS for the Voluntary Stewardship Program until the next scheduled review cycle. Option B. Focus solely on the legal requirements of the Atmospheric Purity Act, as these are mandatory, and consider the Voluntary Stewardship Program as a separate initiative outside the scope of the formal EMS. Option C. Implement measures to meet the stricter VOC emission limits of the Atmospheric Purity Act, and simultaneously develop a plan to achieve the 10% reduction target of the Voluntary Stewardship Program, integrating both into the EMS's operational controls and monitoring. Option D. Update the EMS to reflect the new Atmospheric Purity Act requirements for VOC emissions and establish a new internal target for VOC reduction that aligns with, but does not necessarily exceed, the Voluntary Stewardship Program's goal. The correct answer is D. Update the EMS to reflect the new Atmospheric Purity Act requirements for VOC emissions and establish a new internal target for VOC reduction that aligns with, but does not necessarily exceed, the Voluntary Stewardship Program's goal. Explanation. ISO 14004, 2016 provides guidance on implementing an environmental management system, EMS. A key aspect of this implementation is the systematic identification and understanding of compliance obligations. These obligations encompass not only legal requirements, but also other requirements to which the organization subscribes, such as voluntary agreements, industry codes of practice, and commitments made to stakeholders. When an organization identifies an environmental aspect that may lead to a compliance obligation, it must determine the specific requirements that apply. For instance, if a manufacturing facility has an aspect related to wastewater discharge, it needs to identify the relevant permits, effluent standards set by local environmental agencies, e.g., the Clean Water Act in the United States or equivalent national legislation, and any specific consent conditions imposed by the permitting authority. The process involves understanding the nature of the discharge, the receiving water body, and the applicable regulatory limits for parameters like pH, suspended solids, and chemical oxygen demand. Furthermore, ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes that these obligations should be kept up to date and accessible to relevant personnel. The organization must then integrate these compliance obligations into its EMS, including operational controls, monitoring procedures, and training programs to ensure ongoing conformity. This proactive approach to managing compliance obligations is fundamental to preventing nonconformities and demonstrating environmental responsibility. Question 20. Consider an industrial facility implementing ISO 14004, 2016 guidelines. Their environmental policy mandates a rigorous approach to document control for all environmental procedures. If a critical environmental procedure, such as the Hazardous Waste Manifest Tracking Protocol, is updated due to a recent amendment in the National Environmental Protection Act, what is the most fundamental aspect of document control that must be applied to ensure compliance and operational integrity, according to the principles outlined in ISO 14004, 2016? Option A. Ensuring the updated procedure is reviewed, approved, and distributed to all relevant personnel with a clear indication of revision status and obsolescence of previous versions. Option B. Archiving the original Hazardous Waste Manifest Tracking Protocol in a secure off-site location for historical reference only. Option C. Immediately communicating the procedural update through a company-wide email without requiring formal review or approval. Option D. Conducting a comprehensive risk assessment of the entire environmental management system before implementing any procedural changes. The correct answer is A. Ensuring the updated procedure is reviewed, approved, and distributed to all relevant personnel with a clear indication of revision status and obsolescence of previous versions. Explanation: ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes the need for effective document control within an environmental management system, EMS. This control ensures that documents are reviewed, updated, and made available to those who need them, preventing the use of obsolete information. The core of document control lies in establishing a system that addresses the identification, creation, review, approval, distribution, revision, and retention of environmental documents. When considering the life cycle of an environmental procedure, such as a spill response plan, it must be reviewed at planned intervals or when significant changes occur, like new regulatory requirements or operational modifications. This review process is crucial for maintaining the procedure's relevance and effectiveness. The identification of documents should include unique identifiers to prevent confusion. Distribution mechanisms must ensure that the most current version reaches all relevant personnel, and a clear process for managing obsolete documents is necessary to avoid their accidental use. The ultimate goal is to maintain a controlled and up-to-date set of documentation that supports the effective operation of the EMS and compliance with environmental obligations. Question 21. When an organization is establishing its environmental management system in accordance with ISO 14004, 2016, and it is evaluating the environmental aspects of its logistics operations, which of the following best represents an indirect environmental aspect that the organization should consider for potential influence and management? Option A. Consumption of fuel by the company's fleet of delivery trucks during their scheduled routes. Option B. The generation of packaging waste by the company's third-party logistics provider during the consolidation of shipments which the company procures services from. Option C. emissions of nitrogen oxides NOx and particulate matter PM from company-owned delivery vehicles operating under direct company supervision. Option D. The noise pollution generated by the company's warehouse loading docks during standard operating hours. The correct answer is C. Emissions of nitrogen oxides NOx and particulate matter PM from company-owned delivery vehicles operating under direct company supervision. Explanation. The process of identifying environmental aspects and their associated impacts is a cornerstone of establishing an effective environmental management system, EMS, as outlined in ISO 14004, 2016. ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes a systematic approach to this, moving beyond simple identification to understanding the significance of these aspects and impacts in the context of an organization's operations, products, and services. When considering the broader context of an organization's interactions with its environment, the guidelines stress the importance of looking at direct and indirect aspects. Direct aspects are those that an organization has direct control over, such as emissions from a manufacturing process. Indirect aspects, on the other hand, are those that an organization can influence but does not have direct control over, like the environmental performance of its suppliers or the disposal of its products by end users. Understanding this distinction is crucial for a comprehensive EMS. The guidelines also highlight the need to consider normal operating conditions, abnormal conditions like startup and shutdown, and emergency situations. Furthermore, the significance of an environmental aspect is determined by evaluating its potential or actual environmental impact, considering criteria such as severity, scale, duration, and reversibility, often in conjunction with legal and other requirements. This systematic evaluation allows an organization to prioritize its environmental efforts and focus on areas where it can achieve the most significant improvements, aligning with the Plan Do Check Act cycle of continuous improvement central to ISO 14001 and elaborated upon in ISO 14004, 2016. Question 22. Consider an industrial facility operating under stringent environmental regulations, including the Clean Water Act and local ordinances regarding hazardous substance spills. Following a minor, contained incident involving a chemical leak that was effectively managed by the on-site team, what is the most appropriate next step for the facility's environmental management system concerning its emergency preparedness and response plan, as guided by ISO 14004, 2016? Option A. Document the incident and its resolution, then proceed with the scheduled annual review of the emergency plan without specific modifications, assuming the response was adequate. Option B. Conduct a post-incident review of the emergency response, update the plan based on lessons learned, and schedule a simulated drill incorporating the identified improvements within 6 months. Option C. Immediately revise the emergency response plan to include more advanced containment technologies and postpone any further testing until these upgrades are fully implemented. Option D. Initiate a comprehensive overhaul of the entire environmental management system, including a complete redesign of the emergency response protocols, before conducting any further testing. The correct answer is B. Conduct a post-incident review of the emergency response, update the plan based on lessons learned, and schedule a simulated drill incorporating the identified improvements within 6 months. Explanation. The core principle of testing and reviewing emergency preparedness and response plans, as elaborated in ISO 14004, 2016, is to ensure their effectiveness and the organization's capacity to manage environmental emergencies. This involves simulating potential scenarios and evaluating the response. Regular drills and exercises are crucial for this evaluation. The frequency and type of these tests should be determined by factors such as the organization's environmental aspects, potential environmental impacts, legal and other requirements, and the complexity of the emergency scenarios. A comprehensive review should not only assess the plan's technical adequacy, but also the competence of personnel involved and the availability of necessary resources. It also involves learning from past incidents, whether internal or external, and incorporating these lessons into plan revisions. The objective is to foster continuous improvement in the organization's ability to prevent and mitigate environmental emergencies, aligning with the Plan Do Check Act cycle inherent in environmental management systems. The effectiveness of the plan is measured by its ability to minimize the consequences of an emergency, including environmental damage, harm to human health, and business disruption. This iterative process of testing, reviewing, and revising is fundamental to maintaining a robust and responsive emergency management system. Question 23. Consider a manufacturing facility in a region where new emission standards for volatile organic compounds, VOC, have recently been enacted, setting stricter limits than previously enforced. The organization's environmental management system, aligned with ISO 14004-2016, includes a process for periodic compliance evaluation. Which of the following approaches best exemplifies the proactive and systematic implementation of this evaluation, ensuring ongoing adherence to the updated regulations? Option A. Conducting an initial assessment of the new VOC limits against current emission monitoring data, followed by scheduled quarterly audits of operational controls and an update to the environmental legal register, with any identified deviations triggering immediate corrective action plans and a review of operational procedures. Option B. Relying solely on the company's environmental consultant to notify them of any changes in VOC regulations and to perform an annual compliance check based on historical data. Option C. Updating the environmental policy to acknowledge the existence of new VOC regulations without altering current operational practices or monitoring frequencies. Option D. Implementing a reactive approach where compliance checks are only performed if an environmental incident related to VOC emissions occurs, and then assessing the extent of non-compliance after the fact. Correct answer is A. Conducting an initial assessment of the new VOC limits against current emission monitoring data, followed by scheduled quarterly audits of operational controls and an update to the environmental legal register, with any identified deviations triggering immediate corrective action plans and a review of operational procedures. Explanation: the core principle of periodic evaluation of compliance with legal requirements, as guided by ISO 14004-2016, involves establishing a systematic process to determine if an organization's activities, products, and services meet applicable environmental legislation and other requirements. This process necessitates understanding the scope of relevant laws, such as National Pollution Control Acts, waste management regulations, and chemical substance inventories, as well as local ordinances and permits. Evaluation should not merely check for the presence of a legal register, but should actively assess adherence to specific obligations. For instance, if a regulation mandates a maximum permissible discharge limit for a particular pollutant into a water body, the evaluation must involve monitoring actual discharges and comparing them against this limit. The frequency and methodology of these evaluations are determined by the organization's environmental aspects, potential risks, and the dynamic nature of regulatory frameworks. A robust system would incorporate regular internal audits, management reviews, and potentially external verification to ensure ongoing conformity. The outcome of these evaluations informs the environmental management system, driving corrective actions, improvements in operational controls, and updates to environmental policies and objectives. It's about proactively identifying and rectifying noncompliance before it leads to enforcement actions or environmental damage. The guidance emphasizes that this is an ongoing cycle, not a one-time activity. Question 24. An organization has established an environmental policy that includes a commitment to continually improve environmental performance and prevent pollution. Following this, they set an objective to reduce the volume of packaging materials used by 10% in the next fiscal year. Considering the guidance provided in ISO 14004-2016 regarding the relationship between policy and objectives, what fundamental principle is best exemplified by this action? Option A. The environmental policy is a reactive measure, and objectives are proactive steps without a direct causal link. Option B. The reduction in packaging materials is solely driven by cost-saving initiatives, irrespective of the policy. Option C. The environmental policy serves as a static declaration, with objectives being independent operational targets. Option D. The environmental objectives directly support and operationalize the commitments articulated in the environmental policy. The correct answer is D. The environmental objectives directly support and operationalize the commitments articulated in the environmental policy. Explanation: ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes that an organization's environmental policy and objectives are critical drivers for establishing and maintaining an environmental management system, EMS. The policy, a foundational document, sets the organization's overall direction and principles concerning its environmental performance. Objectives derived from the policy are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. SMART, targets that the organization aims to meet to improve its environmental performance. The connection between the policy and objectives is that the objectives should directly support the commitments and principles outlined in the policy. For instance, if the environmental policy commits to reducing waste generation, a corresponding objective might be to decrease non-hazardous solid waste by 15% within 2 years. The effectiveness of an EMS, as guided by ISO 14004, 2016, hinges on this clear alignment. The policy provides the overarching framework and intent, while objectives translate this intent into actionable and trackable steps. This linkage ensures that all environmental activities and improvements are strategically aligned with the organization's declared environmental aspirations, thereby fostering a robust and responsive EMS that contributes to sustainable development and compliance with relevant environmental legislation. Question 25. A manufacturing firm, Veridian Dynamics, is implementing its environmental management system in accordance with ISO 14004, 2016. While identifying its environmental aspects, the firm noted the emission of volatile organic compounds, VOC, from its painting process and the consumption of electricity for its lighting systems. Veridian Dynamics needs to establish criteria to determine the significance of these aspects. Considering the guidelines within ISO 14004, 2016, for establishing significance criteria, which of the following approaches best reflects a comprehensive and systematic method for Veridian Dynamics to evaluate the significance of these environmental aspects? Option A. Classify an environmental aspect as significant only if it is explicitly mentioned in current national environmental legislation or has been the subject of a past environmental fine against the company. Option B. Prioritize aspects based on the cost of abatement technologies, considering an aspect significant only if the cost to control it is relatively low. Option C. Develop a scoring matrix that weighs factors such as regulatory compliance status, potential for ecosystem disruption, public perception, and the magnitude of resource consumption or emission release against predefined thresholds. Option D. Solely rely on the volume of VOCs emitted and the total kilowatt-hours of electricity consumed, classifying aspects as significant only if they exceed a predetermined absolute numerical limit. The correct answer is C. Develop a scoring matrix that weighs factors such as regulatory compliance status, potential for ecosystem disruption, public perception, and the magnitude of resource consumption or emission release against predefined thresholds. Explanation: the core of establishing criteria for the significance of environmental aspects, as guided by ISO 14004, 2016, involves developing a systematic approach to evaluate their potential or actual impact on the environment. This process requires considering a range of factors, both internal and external to the organization and their interaction. Key considerations include the scale of the impact e.g., local, regional, global, the severity of the impact e.g., reversible or irreversible damage, potential for long-term effects, the probability of the impact occurring, regulatory requirements and legal obligations that may be triggered, stakeholder concerns and expectations, and the organization's own environmental policy and objectives. For instance, a minor emission of a common pollutant might be deemed insignificant if it falls well within regulatory limits and has negligible local impact. However, a similar emission in a sensitive ecosystem, or if it contributes to a cumulative effect that breaches a critical threshold, could be considered significant. The standard emphasizes that these criteria should be documented and applied consistently across the organization to ensure a robust and defensible assessment. The determination of significance is not static. It should be reviewed and updated as circumstances change, such as new regulations, evolving scientific understanding, or changes in operational processes. This systematic evaluation ensures that the organization focuses its resources and management efforts on the environmental aspects that warrant the most attention. Question 26. An industrial facility, striving to meet its objective of reducing hazardous waste generation by 15% within 2 years, as outlined in its environmental policy aligned with ISO 14004, 2016 guidelines, is evaluating potential actions. The facility's significant environmental aspect related to this objective is the generation of solvent-based waste from its manufacturing processes. Relevant legal requirements include national regulations on hazardous waste disposal and treatment. Considering the principles of ISO 14004, 2016 regarding the determination of actions to achieve objectives, which of the following approaches most comprehensively addresses the systematic definition and implementation of these actions? Option A. Delegating the entire responsibility for waste reduction to the Environmental Department, who will then independently research and implement any necessary changes without consulting operational or engineering teams, and deferring any significant investment in new technologies. Option B. Identifying and evaluating alternative solvent chemistries with lower environmental impact, developing new process protocols to minimize solvent usage, establishing a closed-loop solvent recovery and reuse system, and setting up a robust monitoring and measurement program for waste generation metrics. Option C. Implementing a company-wide awareness campaign about the importance of waste reduction through posters and emails, and relying on the existing waste disposal contracts without exploring any process modifications or material substitutions. Option D. Primarily focusing on increasing the frequency of waste collection and disposal by contracting with a new waste management provider who offers more competitive pricing, and conducting a one-time training session for all operational staff on basic waste segregation. Correct answer is B. Identifying and evaluating alternative solvent chemistries with lower environmental impact, developing new process protocols to minimize solvent usage, establishing a closed-loop solvent recovery and reuse system, and setting up a robust monitoring and measurement program for waste generation metrics. Explanation: ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes a systematic approach to establishing, implementing, maintaining, and improving an environmental management system, EMS. When defining actions to achieve environmental objectives and targets, the standard advocates for a process that considers the organization's context, significant environmental aspects, legal and other requirements, and its operational capabilities. The selection of actions should be driven by the need to reduce environmental impacts, prevent pollution, and ensure compliance with relevant legislation, such as the Waste Framework Directive or National Air Quality Standards, which might influence the specific types of actions deemed necessary. Furthermore, the process involves identifying the resources required, assigning responsibilities, determining timelines, and establishing methods for evaluating the effectiveness of the implemented actions. This proactive and integrated approach ensures that the chosen actions are not only technically feasible and economically viable, but also contribute directly to the achievement of the organization's environmental policy and objectives. The selection of appropriate actions requires a thorough understanding of the causal relationships between organizational activities, the environment, and the desired outcomes, as well as an assessment of potential risks and opportunities associated with different implementation strategies. Question 27. When establishing an environmental management program to address a newly identified significant environmental aspect related to volatile organic compound, VOC, emissions from a manufacturing process, which of the following approaches best aligns with the principles outlined in ISO 14004, 2016 for developing effective environmental management programs? Option A. Focusing solely on complying with the minimum legal requirements for VOC emissions as stipulated by local environmental regulations, without setting internal reduction goals or considering broader environmental performance improvements. Option B. Implementing a training program for all employees on general environmental awareness and relying on their collective initiative to identify and reduce VOC emissions without specific targets or timelines. Option C. Developing a detailed action plan that specifies the reduction targets for VOCs, identifies the technologies or process modifications required, assigns responsibility for implementation and monitoring, sets a clear timeline for achieving the targets, and allocates the necessary financial and human resources. Option D. Conducting a single audit of the VOC emission process and documenting the findings, assuming that the audit itself will lead to the necessary improvements without further programmatic intervention. The correct answer is C. Developing a detailed action plan that specifies the reduction targets for VOCs, identifies the technologies or process modifications required, assigns responsibility for implementation and monitoring, sets a clear timeline for achieving the targets, and allocates the necessary financial and human resources. Explanation: ISO 14004, 2016 emphasizes that the development of environmental management programs (EMP) is a crucial step in achieving environmental objectives. These programs are designed to implement an organization's environmental policy and manage its environmental aspects. The guidelines stress that EMPs should be detailed, outlining specific actions, responsibilities, timelines, and the resources required for their implementation. A key aspect of effective EMP development is ensuring that the program addresses significant environmental aspects, legal and other requirements, and the organization's strategic context. Furthermore, ISO 14004, 2016 highlights the iterative nature of EMPs, requiring regular review and revision to ensure continued suitability and effectiveness. The document also points out that the scope and detail of an EMP can vary based on the organization's size, activities, products, and services, as well as the complexity of its environmental management system. The success of an EMP hinges on its integration with the organization's overall management processes and its ability to drive continual improvement in environmental performance. This includes establishing clear performance indicators and monitoring mechanisms to track progress towards objectives. Question 28. Consider an industrial facility that manufactures specialized polymers and generates a significant volume of hazardous chemical effluent. The organization is committed to enhancing its environmental management system in line with ISO 14004-2016. To effectively minimize the environmental impact of this effluent, which strategic control implementation would be considered the most impactful and aligned with the principles of pollution prevention at the source? Option A. Installing advanced tertiary wastewater treatment systems to neutralize and remove contaminants from the effluent before discharge. Option B. Implementing a rigorous schedule for regular monitoring and sampling of the effluent, coupled with strict adherence to discharge permit limits. Option C. Developing comprehensive employee training programs focused on best practices for chemical handling and waste segregation to prevent accidental releases. Option D. Re-engineering the manufacturing process to utilize alternative, less hazardous raw materials and optimize reaction conditions to reduce byproduct formation. The correct answer is D. Re-engineering the manufacturing process to utilize alternative, less hazardous raw materials and optimize reaction conditions to reduce byproduct formation. Explanation: the core of implementing controls to minimize environmental impacts, as detailed in ISO 14004, 2016, involves a systematic approach that prioritizes prevention and reduction at the source. This aligns with the hierarchy of controls, which generally moves from elimination and substitution to engineering controls, administrative controls, and finally, personal protective equipment or waste treatment. ISO 14004 emphasizes integrating these controls into the organization's processes and activities. For an organization dealing with chemical waste from a manufacturing process, the most effective approach, aligning with the principles of minimizing impact and adhering to environmental management best practices, is to first explore options that eliminate or reduce the hazardous nature or quantity of the waste generated. This could involve process redesign, using less hazardous raw materials, or improving reaction efficiencies. If these are not fully feasible, then engineering controls like containment systems or ventilation would be considered. Administrative controls, such as operational procedures and training, are also crucial. However, the question asks for the most effective strategy for minimizing environmental impacts at the source. Therefore, focusing on altering the process to generate less waste or less hazardous waste is the most proactive and impactful control measure. This proactive approach is fundamental to achieving sustainability and reducing the burden on downstream treatment or disposal, which are inherently less desirable from an environmental impact perspective. The concept of the waste hierarchy, which prioritizes prevention and reduction over reuse, recycling, recovery, and disposal, is a guiding principle here. Question 29. Considering the principles outlined in ISO 14004/2016 regarding the assignment of responsibilities and the establishment of timelines for an environmental management system, which of the following approaches best reflects the standard's guidance for a mid-sized manufacturing firm aiming to reduce its volatile organic compound (VOC) emissions in compliance with the Clean Air Act regulations? Option A. Designate a cross-functional team, including representatives from production, engineering, and environmental health and safety, to jointly develop a detailed action plan with specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART objectives for VOC reduction, assigning individual tasks with clear deadlines to team members based on their expertise and operational involvement, and setting an overall target completion date for the initial phase of the plan that aligns with the next regulatory reporting cycle. Option B. Appoint a single senior manager from the operations department to solely oversee all VOC reduction initiatives, granting them complete authority to dictate tasks and timelines without formal consultation, and expecting them to achieve the reduction targets within a loosely defined timeframe based on their personal discretion. Option C. Create a new, dedicated environmental department staffed with specialists who will solely manage VOC reduction, setting ambitious, abstract reduction goals with indefinite timelines that are not integrated with existing departmental responsibilities or operational realities. Option D. Delegate the responsibility for VOC reduction to the lowest level operational staff without providing specific training or resources, and set an arbitrary deadline for compliance that is disconnected from the firm's production schedules or regulatory mandates. The correct answer is A. Designate a cross-functional team, including representatives from production, engineering, and environmental health and safety, to jointly develop a detailed action plan with specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound, SMART objectives for VOC reduction, assigning individual tasks with clear deadlines to team members based on their expertise and operational involvement, and setting an overall target completion date for the initial phase of the plan that aligns with the next regulatory reporting cycle. Explanation: ISO 14004/2016 emphasizes the importance of clearly defining roles and responsibilities within an environmental management system, EMS. It guides organizations in establishing accountability for environmental aspects, impacts, objectives, and legal compliance. The standard suggests that assigning responsibilities should be based on an individual's or group's capacity to influence environmental performance and their level of involvement in specific processes. This assignment is not a static event, but an ongoing process that requires review and adaptation as the EMS evolves or organizational structures change. Effective assignment involves clear communication of duties, authorities, and the necessary resources. Furthermore, the standard highlights the need to establish realistic timelines for achieving environmental objectives and implementing specific actions, ensuring that these timelines are integrated with broader organizational planning and project management. The ultimate goal is to foster a culture of environmental responsibility throughout the organization, ensuring that all relevant personnel understand their contributions to achieving environmental goals and complying with applicable legal and other requirements, such as those stemming from national pollution control legislation or international agreements on biodiversity. Question 30. An organization is planning to implement a comprehensive waste minimization program aimed at achieving a 20% reduction in non-hazardous industrial waste sent to landfill within 3 years, in compliance with the Waste Framework Directive's principles. The program requires investment in new sorting equipment, specialized employee training on material segregation, and ongoing monitoring of waste streams. According to the principles outlined in ISO 14004/2016 regarding resource allocation for program implementation, which of the following approaches best reflects the strategic and effective distribution of financial resources for this initiative? Option A. A phased allocation of funds, directly linked to the achievement of specific, measurable waste reduction milestones and the procurement of necessary capital equipment, ensuring a clear return on investment for each stage of the program. Option B. Proportional allocation of funds based on the historical waste generation rates of each department, without explicit consideration for the program's specific objectives or the capital investment required for new technologies. Option C. A reactive allocation of funds based on the immediate operational needs identified by departmental managers, prioritizing cost savings over the achievement of long-term waste reduction targets. Option D. An upfront, lump sum allocation of the total estimated program cost to a dedicated environmental fund, managed by a central committee with discretionary spending authority for any environmental project. The correct answer is A. A phased allocation of funds, directly linked to the achievement of specific, measurable waste reduction milestones and the procurement of necessary capital equipment, ensuring a clear return on investment for each stage of the program. Explanation: ISO 14004, 2016, in its guidance on implementing environmental management systems, EMS, emphasizes the strategic allocation of resources to support program effectiveness. When considering the implementation of a new waste reduction initiative, a key aspect is determining the most appropriate method for allocating financial resources. This involves a thorough assessment of the initiative's objectives, the scope of activities required, and the potential for generating environmental and economic benefits. The guidelines suggest that resource allocation should be a dynamic process, responsive to changing organizational needs and external regulatory landscapes, such as evolving landfill diversion targets set by national environmental agencies. A robust approach involves forecasting the costs associated with material procurement, employee training, process modifications, and the potential monitoring and reporting requirements. Equally important is the consideration of how these allocated funds will be managed and controlled to ensure they are used efficiently and effectively towards achieving the stated waste reduction goals. This process is not merely about assigning a budget, but about strategically investing in capabilities and changes that drive sustainable environmental performance. The ultimate aim is to ensure that the allocated resources directly contribute to the successful implementation and ongoing improvement of the EMS, aligning with the organization's overall environmental policy and objectives.